It doesn't start with a warning. It starts with a release high above the clouds. A dark shape falling through open sky, silent enough that the city keeps breathing for a few more seconds. Then someone looks up, and the pause spreads like a ripple through a crowd. No sirens, no countdown, just instinct, people moving before they even understand why. The first udar isn't the blast, it's the light. A flash so violent it wipes the camera clean and turns the horizon into a white wound. Heat arrives next, fast enough to ignite a city in scattered sparks. And only after that, the shockwave catches up. A wall of air that doesn't just shake the street, it rewrites it. This is how a normal day becomes history in under a minute. After a flash like that, the real question isn't what happened. It's how did we get here? Because nuclear war doesn't begin with fire. It begins with tension and a phone that won't stop ringing. One call becomes 10. 10 become orders, and suddenly, rooms built for the unthinkable fill with people who have to choose in minutes. The world watches in silence, while machines wake up, while runways light up, while the shapes everyone recognizes, the B-2, the submarine, move without a single headline explaining why. And somewhere behind concrete and steel, a hand hovers over a covered switch, not because it wants to, but because the system says it's time. This is how it starts, not with hatred, but with pressure, and a chain reaction no one can pause. This is how it arrives, not as a myth, as hardware. A flying wing that barely shows up on radar. A hangar that feels colder than a morgue. Doors opening in the sky like the world is holding its breath. Pilots don't need speeches, they need clearance. And far out at sea, a submarine moves like a shadow, quiet enough to feel unreal until you remember it's real. Steel, fuel, hydraulics, ocean, cloud. By the time the public sees anything, the pieces are already in motion. And when the bay opens, the decision becomes gravity. Let's be precise about what a nuclear weapon actually is. It's not fire first. It's energy locked inside matter, released in a fraction of a second. When an atomic nucleus splits, it throws out particles that can trigger more splits. If enough happen together, the reaction multiplies incredibly fast. That single physics event creates 4 real effects that hit a city in layers. First, flash and heat. Light arrives instantly, brighter than the sun, and heat follows close behind, igniting anything dry or fragile in scattered points. Second, the shockwave, a moving wall of compressed air that turns debris into missiles and damages buildings through pressure, not just impact. Third, prompt radiation, silent, invisible, and deadly, present even when the street looks almost normal. And fourth, fallout, ash and particles lifted into the sky, returning minutes later like dirty snow. This isn't science fiction, it's physics happening at a scale humans were never built to face. After the blast, the city doesn't end in one moment. It breaks in 1,000 small ones. People don't run like in movies. They freeze, then move. They help strangers without knowing what they're helping them escape. The streets jam, cars turn into walls, and the first responders fight physics, traffic, smoke, broken lines, just to reach the places that are still burning. Buildings become dangerous even when they're still standing. cracked facades, shredded windows, falling cladding. A city designed for comfort suddenly turns hostile. Then the systems start failing. Power flickers and disappears. Water pressure drops. Phones go quiet. And the normal world, lights, signals, routines, starts to vanish. And nature feels it too. Parks brown. Trees scorch unevenly. Ash lands on rivers like gray dust. And the birds that filled the morning are suddenly gone. This is what makes it terrifying. Not just destruction, but the slow realization that the city you knew can't support life the way it used to. This is the part people never see coming. After the blast, the city looks damaged, but the real danger is floating. Fallout isn't a cloud you can point at. It's dust, ash, particles so small they ride the wind like they belong to it. It settles on cars, on skin, on water. It slips into fabric. It turns breathing into a choice. And the worst part is how unfair it is. The wind decides who gets exposed. One street is lucky, the next street is poisoned. You can't smell it, you can't see it. You can only watch the world change as people cover their faces, seal their homes, and start treating everything like it's contaminated. Because in a nuclear aftermath, the explosion is the headline, fallout is the story. Here's why the story doesn't end after the blast. Radiation drops fast at first. There's a rule of thumb called the 7-10 rule. Every 7 times more time means about 10 times less radiation, so the first hours are the most dangerous. But contamination doesn't vanish, it moves. For a 10-kiloton ground detonation, the most dangerous fallout zone can extend about 10 to 20 miles downwind. And depending on weather, that downwind plume can stretch much farther as a long, uneven shadow. Rain turns airborne particles into dirty runoff. Wind carries them block by block, and sometimes far beyond the city. And this is where years enter the story. Some radioactive materials fade quickly, but others don't. Strontium-90 has a half-life of about 28.8 years. Cesium-137 is about 30 years. That's why hotspots can stay unsafe for years, even decades, without serious cleanup. So the city might still be standing, but the real question becomes, is it a home or a restricted zone shaped by wind, rain, and time? In minutes, a city can go from normal life to light, pressure, fire, and then to something worse, invisible contamination. The blast is fast, the aftermath is slow, and that's what makes it terrifying. Because nuclear war doesn't just destroy a place, it can erase the idea of home for years. So here's the question: how close do you think we are to a war that ends everything?